The rain hammered the diner's roof as 4 black SUVs tore into the parking lot, boxing the building in with terrifying precision. In seconds, armed men in tactical gear flooded the entrance, shattering windows and sending plates crashing to the floor. Behind the counter, Maggie Cole stood frozen, heart pounding, staring into the cold eyes of the man who had once smiled at her, now pointing a gun with deadly calm. But what happened next would shake the entire town to its core. First, let's go back to the beginning. The smell of bacon and old coffee clung to the cracked linoleum floors of the Maple Hollow diner like a second skin. Maggie Cole, apron cinched tight around her waist, moved through the dim morning light with a quiet rhythm born of repetition. The regulars came and went, tired truckers, gruff locals, a couple of lonely souls who nursed coffee refills until noon. But it was behind the diner, where the city's forgotten things gathered, that Maggie's attention kept drifting. Each day, just as the sun rose fat and orange over the cracked asphalt, she caught sight of him. A boy, no more than 10, crouched behind the rusted dumpster as if trying to become part of the shadows. His jeans, once blue, had faded to a sickly gray, and the sleeves of his hoodie were frayed to strings. He sat still for hours, not moving, not begging, not even watching, just being, small, silent, and invisible in a world that had clearly decided he didn't matter. The first time Maggie saw him, her stomach twisted in that old, too familiar way, the way it had when she was 7 years old and hiding from a drunken stepfather in a neighbor's barn. She recognized that stillness. Not laziness, not stubbornness, but the raw, desperate instinct of a creature too used to surviving. She didn't approach him. She knew better than to scare something so wounded. Instead, she began a ritual. After the breakfast rush, when the diner's steam and clatter settled into a drowsy hum, she packed a second meal, a burger with too much ketchup, a thermos of tomato soup she made herself, a slice of cherry pie wrapped in wax paper. She left it by the back door without a word, pretending not to see the slim shadow that darted out to claim it moments later. Some days, when the ache in her chest was too much to bear, Maggie scribbled short notes on napkins and tucked them inside the paper bags. "You're not alone. Stay strong. You matter." She never expected an answer, never demanded one. In the ritual there was comfort, a silent understanding between two broken souls. He needed her in ways he couldn't say, and Maggie, perhaps more than she realized, needed him too. She told herself it was safer not to ask questions. Safer for both of them if this fragile bridge remained nameless, shapeless. But deep down, Maggie knew better. Deep down, she knew that no act of kindness stayed hidden forever, not in a world so hungry to tear good things apart. The morning air was thick with the sticky breath of Charleston's summer, a suffocating blanket that clung to Maggie's skin as she wiped down the diner's fogged windows. Across the cracked 2-lane road, a black sedan sat idle beneath the drooping branches of a live oak. Its windows were too dark to see inside, but Maggie could feel the weight of its presence. Heavy, watchful, wrong. A car like that didn't belong in this neighborhood, where people still parked beat-up trucks and rusted Buicks outside peeling shotgun houses. She shook off the ripple of dread rising in her chest, blaming the humidity, the sleepless night before. But the feeling stayed, an itch just beneath the skin, impossible to ignore. The breakfast rush thinned into a lazy lull by noon, and Maggie turned her focus back to her usual tasks. Coffee refills, cleaning booths, sticky with syrup, making polite conversation with the old men who nursed their bitterness like it was sweet tea. She'd almost forgotten the car by the time the front door chimed, and a stranger crossed the threshold. He didn't fit the place. His suit was an expensive cut, sleek and dark like the car outside. His shoes gleamed under the diner's flickering fluorescent lights, untouched by Charleston's dust. He moved with the coiled patience of someone used to waiting, and used to getting exactly what he came for. Without ordering, he slid onto a cracked red vinyl stool at the counter, resting his hands neatly in front of him. Maggie watched from the coffee pot, instinct prickling again. His gaze swept the room slowly, methodically, before settling on her with unnerving stillness. "Morning," he said smoothly, the corners of his mouth tipping up into a smile that never once touched his cold, calculating eyes. "Name's Victor Cross. I'm looking for a boy, a runaway. Ward of the state, you might say." Maggie met his stare, willing her voice to stay steady. "Don't know anything about that," she said, feigning the careless air of a woman with no secrets to guard. Her hands, hidden under the counter, curled into fists. Cross's smile lingered a second too long before he slid off the stool with a grace that was almost reptilian. He left without ordering, without another word, the door swinging closed behind him with a hollow rattle that seemed far too loud in the silent room he left behind. Maggie stood rooted to the spot, staring at the empty seat where he had been. Deep inside, she understood something she hadn't let herself admit until that moment. She and the boy were no longer invisible. The rain came down in thick, angry sheets, drumming against the diner's tin roof with a relentless, frantic rhythm. Outside, the world was a smear of gray, storefronts blurred by mist, streetlights bleeding into puddles like melting stars. Inside, the Maple Hollow diner smelled of burnt coffee and wet wool, the atmosphere dense with a restlessness Maggie couldn't shake. For 3 days, Noah had vanished. No sign behind the dumpster, no scrawny figure darting from the shadows when Maggie set out a meal. She told herself maybe he had found help, but deep down, gnawing at the marrow of her bones, she knew better. Boys like Noah didn't just find help. They disappeared, swallowed by a world that didn't even pause to notice. She was topping off a trucker's coffee when it happened. A low rumble at first, barely more than a shudder underfoot. Then louder. Stronger. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen rattled in warning just before the front windows flashed black with movement. 4 SUVs, matching gleaming obsidian, skidded into the parking lot, forming a grim perimeter around the diner. Tires screeched against the soaked asphalt, cutting through the morning's brittle calm like a blade through paper. Before Maggie could move, the doors of the vehicles flew open in a near-synchronized dance. Men clad head to toe in black tactical gear poured out, their rifles gripped with mechanical precision, their faces hidden behind visors that turned them into faceless phantoms. Screams erupted as customers dove under tables, coffee cups shattered on the floor, and the jukebox sputtered and fell silent mid-song. Maggie stood frozen behind the counter, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, heart thundering so loud she couldn't hear herself think. Through the chaos, one man approached, steady, deliberate, cutting through the panic like a knife through butter. Broad-shouldered and weathered, he moved like a man accustomed to commanding storms. His graying buzz cut bristled with rain, and when he pulled a badge from inside his jacket, it flashed under the diner's flickering lights with the grim authority of something official and irrevocable. "Agent Thomas Reed," he said, voice low, carrying easily over the din. His gaze was sharp but not cruel. "We know you've been feeding Noah McAllister. You need to come with us. Now." Maggie's body stiffened, her mind a blur of questions she couldn't ask. How could they know? Who had told them? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. In the pit of her stomach, a cold certainty took root. The fragile line she had walked for weeks had finally snapped. And now, everything she cared about was in the crosshairs. The safe room was nothing more than a gutted storeroom hastily retrofitted for emergencies. Concrete walls, a bolted steel door, a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry hornet. Maggie sat stiffly in a metal chair, her apron damp with rain and fear, her mind trying and failing to stitch the morning's chaos into something that made sense. Across from her, Agent Thomas Reed stood with arms crossed over his broad chest, the lines around his eyes carved deep by years of staring down threats most people never knew existed. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and grave, every word chosen like a stone carefully placed in a wall Maggie would never climb over again. "Noah McAllister isn't just a kid on the run," Reed said. "He's the son of Daniel McAllister, lead software architect for SutterTech." He paused, letting the name settle. Even Maggie, who didn't follow politics or big business, had heard whispers about SutterTech. Something about government contracts, backdoor deals, corruption scandals buried deep and quiet. 6 months ago, Reed continued, Daniel found evidence linking SutterTech executives and several high-ranking politicians to an offshore laundering network. Billions of dollars, military contracts, election funds, things people would kill to protect. Maggie swallowed hard, her hands knotting into the damp fabric of her apron. They tried to bribe him. Then they threatened him. When that didn't work, they made him disappear, shot dead in a staged car accident on a back road outside Richmond. Maggie's stomach lurched. She could see Noah now, those wary, too-old eyes, the way he sat so still it hurt to look at him. He hadn't been just scared of the streets. He had been running for his life. "And Noah?" Her voice cracked despite herself. "He was there," Reed said simply. "He saw everything." The room spun for a moment, the walls too close, the air too thin. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself, but it was no use. "And Victor Cross," she forced out. "The man in the diner." "Private contractor," Reed said, and there was venom under the professional veneer now. "A mercenary, paid very, very well to clean up problems like Noah." Maggie stared at him, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had thought she was slipping a boy a sandwich, a kind word. She hadn't realized she was standing between him and a bullet. "And by helping him," she whispered. Reed's jaw tightened. "You're a problem now, too." Fear rooted itself deep inside her, cold, suffocating. But woven into it, strong as iron, came something hotter, sharper. Fury. Fury at the men who had murdered a father. Fury at a world where a scared little boy had to survive by hiding behind dumpsters. Fury that by doing something so simple, so human, she had painted a target on her own back. And somehow, even knowing all that, Maggie Cole realized she didn't regret a damn thing. The room still hummed with the tension of what Maggie had just learned when her words snapped the air like a whip. "You can't just hide him like evidence," she cried, stepping forward, her voice raw and shaking with fury. "He's a child, not a bargaining chip." Agent Reed, statuesque under the buzzing fluorescent light, didn't even blink. His voice came cool, measured, the kind that had been trained not to crack under the weight of guilt. "We're not hiding him. We're protecting him. And now, you too." The words might have been meant to reassure, but they rang hollow against the gnawing terror tightening in Maggie's gut. She knew the difference between protection and confinement. She had lived it as a girl, in a house where keeping you safe meant locking doors and silencing cries. Now, though, there was no time for old ghosts. Rain pounded the roof so violently it seemed like the heavens themselves were trying to break in. Thunder rolled low and menacing in the distance, a warning too late to be heeded. The diner's world-weary walls shuddered as headlights sliced through the downpour. A single vehicle, black and predatory, pulling into the lot with a certainty that turned Maggie's blood to ice. Not the feds, not safety. A split second later, glass exploded inward. The door slammed off its hinges. Chaos reigned. Cross's men moved with deadly precision, shadows stitched together by violence and greed. Muzzle flashes lit the dark like jagged bursts of lightning. Dishes shattered. The jukebox shrieked before falling silent forever under a hail of bullets. Maggie dropped instinctively behind the counter, hands over her head, heart battering her ribs. She dared to lift her eyes just in time to see Victor Cross, no longer the polished, smiling predator who once perched at her counter, but a beast unleashed. His face was a mask of cold focus, and he fired without hesitation, without care. This was his true form. Efficient, pitiless, final. The federal agents met him head-on. Reed barked orders like a general in battle, every move sharp and practiced. The clash was brutal, deafening, fast. It was over in minutes, but each second etched itself into Maggie's bones. When the smoke cleared, Cross was on the floor, blood staining his tailored shirt, wrists zip-tied behind his back. His glare cut through the chaos, directed at Maggie, full of a hatred so naked it almost stole her breath. Almost. Maggie stood tall behind the counter, fists clenched at her sides, the world tilting but her heart steady. The diner was a battlefield now, glass and blood and broken promises littered across linoleum. But Noah, somewhere hidden behind walls, shielded by people who fought for him, was alive. And Maggie, against fear, against common sense, against the odds, had kept the silent vow she made when she first slipped him that burger in the alley. No matter what it costs me, I will not let him be lost. The Maple Hollow diner smelled different now, not just of frying bacon and over-perked coffee, but of fresh paint, new hope, and something sweeter still, a kind of unspoken reverence. 2 weeks after the gunfire and chaos, the battered old place stood proud again under a brighter awning, its windows polished clean of bullet scars, its battered booths repaired with care. The grand reopening wasn't marked with speeches or ceremonies. That wasn't Maggie Cole's way. Instead, it happened in quiet gestures. A heavier clink of tips dropped into the jar. The brief but meaningful nods from the truckers and old-timers who once saw her only as the girl who poured their coffee. The story had run its course through the town faster than wildfire. Local waitress helped save key witness in corruption trial. The newspapers printed it in bold black letters, but the real tale spread softer, passed from mouth to mouth in barbershops, churches, grocery lines. In Maggie, the town saw something rare. A quiet kind of heroism, the kind that didn't wear medals or crave applause. Reporters came sniffing around, waving microphones and promises of spotlights. Maggie refused them all. She didn't want her name in lights. She wanted the diner to feel normal again. Safe, steady, real. The community, however, wasn't content to leave things there. Donations arrived in envelopes tucked under plates and mugs, crisp bills wrapped in notes that simply said, "Thank you." The regulars, the same ones who used to grumble about cold toast or burnt bacon, began tipping twice, sometimes 3 times what their meal cost. Every kindness stitched the diner back together piece by piece until it felt almost whole again. The late summer sun dipped low one evening as Maggie wiped down the counter, the diner nearly empty except for the soft hum of the ice machine. She didn't hear the door open, only felt a sudden shift in the air. Turning, she saw him. Noah. He stood near the entrance, smaller than she remembered, or maybe just lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally slipped from his shoulders. A man and woman hovered nearby, his new foster family, but it was Noah who approached, his sneakers silent against the tile. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper, edges worn and smudged. He extended it to her wordlessly, his face serious, vulnerable in a way that cracked Maggie's heart wide open. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. One word stared back at her, written in a shaky, uncertain scrawl. Family. The dam inside her broke. Maggie dropped to her knees, gathering him into her arms. Noah clung to her, small and solid and real, and she squeezed him as if anchoring them both to the ground. In that moment, the past, all the fear, the danger, the loneliness, fell away. They had found each other in the wreckage. They had survived. And here, in a broken-down diner smelling of coffee and rain and new beginnings, they had built something stronger than safety. They had built a home.